To show you as clearly as possible how to use conductive thread to connect two circuit boards, I've created this large model of two smart sewable RGB LEDs that let's say they might be the eyes for your stuffed animal project. The purple thread here, or the purple cord, indicates connections that have already been made. We're not going to worry about those. We're just going to worry about the connection that you would need to make between these two circuit boards. So that would be from this little bit of silver right here through this hole over to the silver pad over here in this hole. I'm going to do that. I'm going to model that using this pink silk cord. But when you're working on your final project, you will of course use conductive thread. One of the issues you're going to run into when working with conductive thread is that it's kind of springy. So when you go to tie a knot in it, it actually sort of tries to spring open. You just kind of were to play with the fabric that was holding that knot, or that knot was tied through or to, you'd see it sort of almost work itself open there. And so to combat this issue, we're going to use some glue to keep our knots from unraveling. The problem with using glue, though, is it doesn't stay where you put it. In this example, you can see how capillary action causes water that I've dyed red to flow along a nylon cord. In the same way, glue will flow through your thread, so we need to be careful where we tie the knots that we're eventually going to glue. To begin, I'm going to start sewing from a couple stitches away from the pad on my circuit board, this silvery section here that you can see on the top, and then it's actually on the inside of this hole, and then even on the bottom. The reason I'm going to start a couple stitches away is because if I start my thread here and then eventually glue it, I'm concerned that capillary action will actually pull that glue through the circuit board, or through the thread and onto the circuit board. And if that glue gets in between these pads and my thread, it will actually insulate the connection. It will prevent electrons from flowing between the thread and the pad here, the circuit board, and I'll just have a poor connection. So I'm going to start a few stitches away, and I'm going to do it on the back side because I don't want my knots to show up on my project. I want it to look good. So let's see, I'm going to start it right around, I think, here. And I'm starting it a little bit to the side, not directly in the middle. You'll see why in a minute here. I also want to remind you that when you're working with felt, you don't want to just tie a knot in the end of your thread. And for pretty much any e-textiles project, I wouldn't do this, just to be on the safe side. And that's because if you pull, it might pull straight through. So as a reminder, instead of tying a knot at the end of the thread to keep it from pulling through, I like to tie a square knot. And to make using my square knot mnemonic easy, I'm going to rotate my model here, and then I'm going to say right over left, and then left over right. And now I have a nice little square knot to start my thread. I'm going to do a couple stitches to get my thread to the circuit board. And I'm going to go right up through the connecting hole on this circuit board. I'm going to go down, let's see here, the middle hole first.
go back through the same hole here because I don't really have a lot of options when it comes to being inside the circuit board. But when I make my next connection, I could try to go through this same hole here, but then that would stress the same part of my fabric. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew through a different hole so that I can spread that stress out. And each time I do this, I'm pulling really tight. I'm pulling really tight because I want to have a quality electrical connection between my circuit board and my conductive thread. The tighter I pull, the closer the thread is to the circuit board. So now I have 3 wraps around this circuit board. So that would be a pretty good connection. Now that I have 3 wraps of conductive thread around my circuit board, I want to keep them from coming loose by tying a few half hitches. So I'm going to put my needle under one of these stitches here. I'm just going to tie half hitches to a stitch. It doesn't really matter which stitch. I'm going to pull things nice and tight. And then I'm going to bring my thread around just like this so you can see clearly how I'm tying the half hitch. I'm going to go underneath this piece and over this piece. And when I pull it tight, I get my first half hitch. Then I'm going to do that exact same thing again. Under here, over there, gets me a second half hitch. And one last half hitch just to make sure things stay tight. So I like to do 3 half hitches for each of my, every time I connect to a circuit board or when I end my thread. So now I need to connect from this pad on this circuit board to this one over here. So I'm just going to sew some stitches through my canvas or my fabric. So at this point, I have a nice, strong, quality electrical connection between these 2 circuit boards. But now I need to end this thread somewhere, and I don't want to end it right here because if I put glue through here, again, it might flow through my thread and get onto the circuit board. And if it gets in between the thread and this pad, I'll have a weak electrical connection. So I'm going to sew a few stitches away. And to end things, I'm going to just pick a stitch that's already on my project, or that I've already made. And I'm just going to tie some half hitches to that one. If this were actual conducting thread on your finished product, then the next thing you would do is test the connection and make sure it's rock solid. And then after that, you'd put a little bit of glue on your beginning and on your end knot to keep them from coming undone. I like to use fabric glue in this situation because it is flexible and stretchable. If you use something like super glue, then your knots will become brittle and you might actually see them break over time. But fabric glue, I've used it several times now and it seems like it will last forever.